and welcome to our video about the 9/11 bombings and the war on terror. In this video, we are contesting that announcing the war on terror was not actually justified. At the end of this video, you will know what the 9/11 bombings and the war on terror were, and understand that the war was not justified. Who are Al-Qaeda? Al-Qaeda is an Islamic terrorist group which was based in Sudan in the early 1990s and then Afghanistan, where they were supported by the extremist group the Taliban. They merged with other extremist groups such as the Egyptian jihadists and the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. They committed acts of terror against the US embassies in the North and West Africa. This led up to the terrorist hijacking which caused 9/11. Their main goals are converting people to Islam, encourage Islamic movements, and to attack those who oppose Islam. Al-Qaeda's enemies are the US and its allies, as well as other religions who don't follow Islam. Al-Qaeda started off as a military group to oppose the Soviet Union in the Afghan war by beginning to recruit people.
What were the 9/11 bombings? The 9/11 attacks were the events that occurred during the 9th of September 2001. These events were acts of terrorism and coordinated suicide. 19 militants associated with the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda got through security and boarded planes Flight 11, 175, 77, and 93, later hijacking them while in air and taking control. Flight 11 and 175 crashed into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center, trapping people on the top floors of the buildings, leaving them no choice but to jump down. Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, and Flight 93's target was the White House, but it crashed into a field in Pennsylvania near Shanksville due to the passengers attempting to regain control of the plane. 9/11 will always be remembered as one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in history. 9/11 is also one of the main reasons that the US declared a movement against terrorism to eliminate or defeat extremist groups such as Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and ISIS. The total death count was around 3,000, and over 25,000 people were injured as a result of the 9/11 attacks.
What impact did the 9/11 bombings have on the US and the world? 9/11, the attacks carried by the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, shook everyone as no one had seen such a large-scale attack before. The 9/11 impacted security around the world. They had banned small knives which were allowed before on airport security checks. 9/11 tightened airport security laws, making it more secure. The 9/11 attacks had also damaged buildings such as the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, resulting in the US having to pay billions for the repairs. The 9/11 attacks also urged the US to start the campaign called the War on Terror, announced in 2001. What is the War on Terror? The US President George Bush announced the War on Terror on September 12, 2001. The War on Terror is a campaign aiming to prevent or decrease terrorist attacks, especially like the attacks during 9/11. Their target groups are mainly ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other jihadist terrorist groups. After the 9/11 bombing, jihadists had killed over 100 people within the borders of the United States, not mentioning other parts of the world. The death count is much less with non-jihadist terrorism groups. Al-Qaeda terrorist groups refused to hand over their leader, Osama bin Laden, the man responsible for the bombing. The War on Terror is the longest ongoing war in American history. Around 136 other countries from around the world supported the US. Allies of the US were obliged to support them in the war.
Was the retaliation justified? The retaliation was not justified as the United States had killed over 335,000 innocent civilians, whereas terrorism had killed around 230,000 in the past decade. The United States had also obliged to spend around $6.4 trillion in costs to help with the war effort for the next several decades. At least 970,000 people have a disability due to the wars. Many veterans have also died to malnutrition and a damaged health system. Most soldiers have suffered mental disabilities such as PTSD. The wars also sparked an intense hatred between terrorist groups and the United States that would last for centuries. In conclusion, the retaliation was not justified as the United States had killed more civilians than terrorism had and had been obliged to spend trillions in dollars for the next decades.
Al-Qaeda is an Islamic terrorist organization which started off as a military group opposing the Soviet Union. Al-Qaeda's aim is to convert people to Islam as well as fight off the enemies of Islam. Al-Qaeda's enemies include the US and its allies and other religions. They are supported by other Islamic jihadist groups such as the Taliban. The 9/11 bombing was a series of attacks planned and executed by Al-Qaeda. The attacks killed over 3,000 people and another 25,000 were injured. The hijacked planes flew into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and another crashed in a field when the passengers attempted to regain control. 9/11 changed the security of airports, tightening airport security laws so that small knives are not allowed. Cockpit doors were also locked and more spy marshals were on planes. 9/11 was what urged the US to announce a war on terror. The War on Terror is a campaign launched by the US on September 12, 2001, aiming to prevent terrorist attacks and also to eliminate terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Taliban. The US are obliged to spend over $6.4 trillion in costs to help with the war effort. The war's killed over 335,000 innocent civilians and a lot of war veterans. At least 970,000 soldiers have a disability or died due to malnutrition and damaged health systems. We think the war was not justified because of the loss of many innocent civilians and soldiers, as well as the amount of money the US had to spend on the war effort.